Hello everyone, Santa here, and welcome to another video in my talking about something that's been on my mind, sharing my internal monologue series. And today I want to talk about bucket terms, and I hate them. I need to explain what a bucket term is first, though, so that way I can explain why I hate them. So a bucket term is a term that I use for a type of categorization. So this is where it's a descriptor for something, but it's not descriptive of what belongs in it. So it's kind of a bucket that people can toss stuff into. I don't know that that's entirely clear. So the immediate one that comes to my mind that you see a lot if you're reading the Bible is the phrase sexual immorality. What does sexual immorality mean? Well, it's whatever anybody's decided is sexually immoral. It doesn't describe what's in it. It doesn't have any sort of definition for what qualifies as sexually immoral. It just is whatever people have decided is sexually immoral gets thrown into the sexual immorality bucket. And that allows people to kind of like run wild with it. So that's the example that most comes to my mind, but it is by far not the only type of bucket or the only example of a bucket term. So I dislike bucket terms because of the thing that I just said, which is that they do not describe what belongs in them, and therefore they allow people to just toss whatever they want freely into them. The problem that I have with this is it makes it very difficult to understand why or when anything goes into there. Because it's extremely subjective, fundamentally, what goes into a bucket term or what that bucket term describes, it can lead to a great deal of ambiguity in discussion and conversation. When you have a very clearly defined term, basically a set that's well defined, then people can discuss it and know what it is that they're talking about. But when you have a poorly defined set, it becomes extremely difficult. So there's so many different things that fall into this sort of category that are social concepts, social things that we discuss. I suspect various types of bigotry may end up in here. What qualifies as something that is a bigoted concept or a bigoted term can vary wildly from somebody's experience and what they've encountered. And that can make it so that way we have to be able to actually define what belongs in this set. If we don't define what belongs in the set and we have too ambiguous of a label, it means that we're talking past each other. And this is the big problem, is these bucket terms, they create two big issues. The first one is miscommunication, because people are talking past each other because they've defined this set differently. This group of things that they've decided that this bucket term applies to aren't the same, and they disagree about what constitutes elements in that bucket without actually realizing it. And so that means person A, which is going to be represented by this hand, uses this term to refer to their set that they've decided belong in that. Person B, represented by this other hand, for this illustration, has another set of things that they put in there. And there's probably a little bit of overlap, probably. But when person A says this term, person B does not have the same idea in their head when they hear it. And so there's miscommunication, because this person says one thing and this other person hears something else, even though they use the same set of words, because what that word is referring to, what that bucket contains, is not going to be the same from one person to the next. And that's one of the big problems of bucket terms, because they're not explicitly defined lists of things. They are just a bucket that you can throw things in as long as you have some way of tagging that thing, or have decided to tag the thing with whatever it is that qualifies as being part of that bucket. Then it gets trapped in there. Or you can toss it in there and say, oh, this qualifies. It's like, okay. But then when you use that term, you're thinking of this list of things, and when somebody hears the term, they're thinking of a different list of things, or, again, probably some overlap, but you get the idea. And so that leads to miscommunication. The other problem that we run into is an internal one. So we have the communication problem, but then there's also the one that's internal. When you hear that term, are you like, where do you stop putting things in there? Like, these can become sort of black holes of, let's just keep throwing things in there that we feel we can at all maybe possibly put the label on, because it doesn't have any sort of definite criteria other than here's a tag that we have decided to attribute to this thing. It can just kind of run wild, and you can just keep chucking stuff in there. And what ends up happening is maybe you start off at a fairly sane place of like, okay, these things are clearly belong into this bucket. And then you get used to that, but you're like, am I really doing this sufficiently? Or do more things belong to this? Like if you're worried about, am I violating this bucket? Especially if the bucket's about bad things, which often they are, and that's where they tend to cause problems. Am I violating this this bucket? Am I doing something that I shouldn't be doing that's in this bucket? And then you begin wondering, okay, well, do I have a complete bucket? And then you keep adding stuff to the bucket to feel like, am I making this complete? And so you can kind of run away with it and really cause a lot of self-injury that way to your own psyche by putting things in the bucket that have no business being in the bucket, but because it's basically a slippery slope argument, right? Because you've basically put things in the bucket, now you're looking at things that aren't in the bucket and wondering if they actually belong in the bucket. And then you keep doing that until you've kind of like kept escalating, and then you've put things that have no business being in the bucket, and so this can cause internal harm as well. So anyway, those are reasons why I hate bucket terms and would prefer my sets to be well defined. Thank you very much. So that way we can all be on the same page and we don't self-escalate. So that's bucket terms. Thank you all for listening. You can support me at patreon.com/Santier. And until next time, everyone, take care. Goodbye.